Good day, everyone. Welcome to the second episode of the Digital Cargo Webinars 2021. This episode will be about the digital cargo, and this session will start shortly. Welcome to the second episode of the Digital Cargo Webinars 2021, dedicated on digital cargo. My name is David So, and I will be facilitating these webinars today. So as I mentioned, this episode is the second one of a series of webinars that we scheduled over this summer. We had the executive sessions last Tuesday, and today we have the one dedicated on digital cargo. And as you can see, there will be one on interactive cargo that will be presented by Sonia. Then the pilots and hackathon will be presented by Arnaud. One recall will be presented by Christophe. And we'll have as well one session dedicated to the EU Federated project in which IATA is contributing. That will be presented by Hank. And the last episode will be dedicated on the cargo products and tools that is on the 30th of July, and which will be the last episodes. Should you have or need more information on any of these sessions, just on Google and hit IATA Digital Cargo Webinars, and you should end up to the webpage where you'll have all the details, program agenda, and so on. So these webinars is still under the competition law guidelines, and as such, will not discuss any elements related to price, fares, or service charges, commissions, allocations of customers of market, marketing plans, commercial terms, or any other strategic decisions, group boycotts, any topic related to relations with agents, airline solution providers, or other parties, and any issue that aim to influence the independent decisions of business competitors. Please note as well that this webinar will be recorded so that we can publish it on our website, and so that you can catch up later on this episode, or if you missed it, you have the chance to look at it. Also, as this is a webinar, we will be able to capture all the questions using the tool. So if you have any questions, put your questions during the presentations in the Q&A box. And at the end of the panel discussions, we have Q&A sessions where we'll be able to take all the questions that you submitted in the system. Today, we'll have several guests with us. So Judith Diepenmaat from Air France KLM, Matthias Hurst from Agility, Klaas Kurtz from DB Schenker, Ashok Rajan from IBS Software, Alessandra Rivolta from Allegro. All the guests will be with us either to present this afternoon or to be at the end of the sessions with the panel discussions to discuss about the standardizations for the industry. So let's start, and with a short introduction from my side. So today the theme is dedicated to digital cargo, and what I mean by digital cargo is standards and building blocks that enables the air cargo stakeholders to fully embrace their digital transformation journey. So basically here we'll talk this afternoon about all the initiatives that we're doing to standardize the digital component so that the different stakeholders can, at the end of the day, plug and play with all these elements to be able to transform themselves. To support the standard settings of the digital cargo standards, earlier this year, we set up a new group under the COTB, which is the Cargo Operations and Technology Board, which is the Digital Cargo Working Group. So this new group is mainly a merge between the former e-cargo working group and the former One Report Task Force. And its main objective is to support, advise, and contribute to the development of the standard for digital cargo. And in the scope, we have mainly the new data sharing standard One Report, with the data models, the API, and the security specifications. But also, we need to take into account the legacy environment. And this group is aimed to look at EOA bill and e-freight as well. Most importantly, the group will look at how to integrate the One Record standards within the legacy environment, and how we can best support the industry to progressively migrate from this legacy environment to One Record and the new data sharing environment. So this group has 20 members and observers, including IATA strategic partners. The way this group is working is to look at the different topic through what we call the focus activity. And the focus activity is made of a group of experts with a max of 10-15 people that are dedicated to produce a specific set of deliverables that will address one specific issue. So unlike the way we used to work in the e-cargo working group, for instance, where we have tons of topics, where all the group needed to look at all the different topics. What we decided to do is to have this focus activity to really segregate the piece of work so that people can commit and dedicate some time on a specific deliverables. We believe that with such an agile structure, we will be able to deliver more. Also, that we will be able to mobilize doers and not only people that are here to observe, because we need the contributions, active contributions. And also, we believe that the Digital Cargo Working Group acts as a guarantee of industry relevance and representation in the definition of what we want to deliver. So the main reason for this new group to exist is to have a more efficient structure for better use of industry resources. As we all know today, resources are scarce but important, and we need to make sure that we use it the best way possible. The topic that will be covered by the DCWG, I touched on it. It's going to be mainly one record, the legacy environment with e-freight and e-waybill, but also a new topic that are rising in terms of interest, which is topics around cargo distributions and topics around billing and settlement. So currently we have defined these few focus activities where contributors, members, observers volunteer to work on a specific deliverables. And now I will hand over to Matthias, who will share with us the vision of the DCWG, the importance of the standardization of digital component. Matthias Furst from Agility is the chair of the Digital Cargo Working Group. Over to you, Matthias.
Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome. David, thanks for the introduction. And I would like to use that opportunity to thank the group for giving this clear vote for me to become the chair of the group. I'm very honored because I didn't expect this as a forwarder to be the chair of the Digital Cargo Working Group. But I also think, especially given that Klaas Koerts from DB Schenker, who also represents a forwarder, clearly shows that there is an increased awareness in the industry that we need to involve more stakeholders and not only look at it from an air cargo perspective. So with that, I would like to start my quick presentation, and for all the ones that know me already and are afraid, I promise to keep it really short.
Matthias, we can't hear you anymore.
Oh, for some reason it went to mute. So what can the Digital Cargo Working Group, how can we serve the industry? I think the most critical point, and I mentioned it in the introduction already, is the collaboration and co-creation aspect. We really need to leverage the expertise and also the experience that the members and the observers have. And we also need to value their extended networks because they work with partners in the supply chain as well. And we really need to explore this and also try to leverage synergies. Then, yeah, the stakeholder engagement is critical, as David showed in the introduction. In his introduction, we want to have groups of doers, and but we certainly cannot do that alone between forwarders and airlines. We certainly need more partners involved, like the ground handling agents, regulatory authorities. We need representatives from other transport modes. We obviously need to talk with the other IATA working groups and task forces. We need to collaborate with Cargo IQ and so on. It is really, really important that from an end-to-end perspective, we look at the requirement of all stakeholders and get them engaged, because otherwise the link will break, right? And our solutions won't work. Within the group, and I'm really positive about the mindset that the people in the members of the DCWG, Digital Cargo Working Group, the mindset they have, most of them really focus on digital first and try to promote this. And this is what we're doing in the working group as well. Because as long as we stick to our traditional sequential ways of doing things, we will never really become digital. And we have seen this, especially in the area of eHighwayBill. We really need to share experience and best practice, because this is where each of us can really gain progress. We don't need to reinvent the wheel for solutions that others might have found already. And obviously, the Digital Cargo Working Group also needs to support the IATA One Record pilot projects, and many of us, many of the members and observers are involved in those pilot projects, and they're highly interesting, and I really can recommend that all of the attendees of this call really look into these pilots and think about potential projects themselves. Then I think that the standard needs to be open and free. We need to have one standard, so not many, no conversions, no different interpretations. We need one standard that needs to be open and free, and that really can be deployed as the core of our global digital ecosystem. And we can work on that in a very agile way, and I think we are actually proving this during, or having proven this during the design and development phase. And yeah, this is also one of the key elements how we can get to a truly digital industry. And then last but not least, we really need to learn from the past. We need to fix legacy issues. This is not only to do with well-known conversation issues we have, conversion issues we have, converting messages up and down and between different formats, losing data, or adding data where potentially doesn't even belong. And then also the ever-increasing regulatory requirements, which are currently covered in the OCI segment, that is still causing a lot of pain for many of the stakeholders. So we need to learn from all that, and then fix those issues and make sure that we can avoid them for the future. Now, what are the benefits of sharing data? The data sharing is at the core of what we need to do, at least in my opinion, because we need a truly interoperable global ecosystem that can be used by all of the stakeholders, be it shippers, forwarders, ground handling agents, airlines, regulatory authorities, and so on. We really need this. And first of all, we need to have the stakeholder, we will gain stakeholder acceptance, because the more people that can use a standard, the more likely it is that those people also will adopt the standard, rather than developing something on their own or having to deal with all the conversions, for example, that we had to do in the past. So we really can look forward to faster and easier adoption of the standards. Then the data sharing will also improve the data availability and the quality. We're looking into processes of improving incorrect data or providing audit trails, and all of this in a very transparent manner, so we can also cater for all potential regulatory requirements. And with the data sharing, we can also reduce potential quality and loss of control issues, and therefore reduce economic and legal risk. And last but not least, the data sharing will also support IoT in a much better way than this would be ever possible in the sequential messaging environments we're doing today. Now, connectivity, the data sharing should be plug and play. And I mentioned this on the very first point already. We need to enable all the stakeholders to just join and get it rolling without having to break their heads about potential message versions and conversions. And we also can get away with media breaks, and we will reach a wider audience, and we can reach more stakeholders and get them connected much quicker than if it's compared to now, where stakeholder has to really think about versions or engage third parties to sort out the related issues. So that might also use to reduce cost for the hosting, but this is also a point I forgot to mention on the previous point, because the data will be available usually from the source already. And then, as I mentioned, we will also end the vulnerable sequential flow of data, which is causing so many headaches today. If something goes wrong, none of the other stakeholders in the chain will be able to work with the data. Based on shared data, everybody who is authorized to access the data can use and work with the data. So we will have a much better productivity than we currently see. Preparedness is another very important topic. If there is a widely adopted standard and with clear rules, it is also easy to implement new requirements, for example, from regulators. All of us remember the China Customs Advanced Manifest that caused a lot of headache in the industry. Such things easily can be avoided based on the data sharing principles we're now working on. Obviously, any other potential requirement like sustainability reporting, which is of growing interest to the industry as well, can be easily covered as well. Based on the data sharing principles, we also can work with new technologies, because if the new technologies do not depend on messages sending from one partner to another, we can also introduce new data-driven technologies that make our lives easier. Then we also will see an enhanced user experience. We heard it in the previous meetings from, again, or in the executive session, that we need to think about digital natives and so on. And I mean, it's very difficult nowadays to explain to our users or any user of the other stakeholder groups that what we're currently able to do in the internet, when we go to, I don't know, Amazon, Alibaba, and do our online shopping, or when we go to a booking portal for our airline for flights and hotels, where everything is nice and easy on a mobile application, that even works for multiple, let's say, airlines or vendors, then it's very difficult to explain to a user that this currently is not possible based on the way that the air cargo industry is working now. So we can also get away from that and have a more user-centric experience. And because of the open and free standards, more people can contribute to the pool. It's not only airlines and forwarders who discuss how the world should look like. We might see other parties coming on board and coming up with solutions that we might not even think of today, because we can't see the wood for the trees anymore, because we're dealing for so long with the same issues. But new people with a fresh view on things potentially can come up with solutions that we really, really need, but don't even see yet. So that's also something that we will see, and those solutions that might even, expand or link with the new technologies, like enhancing aviation security by using big data, artificial intelligence, and the sooner the data is available for the appropriate stakeholder, the more easy it is to apply those new technologies and also create new solutions and innovate. And I think we really need this, because we see that happening everywhere, just not too much in our own air cargo environment. And we have seen a little uptake on this, and it has been mentioned in the executive session by Dorothea von Boxberg, Lufthansa Cargo, that companies are more and more looking into solutions like Web Cargo, Cargo One, and so on, that help to facilitate the user experience between multiple stakeholders and multiple vendors. And we will be able to see that as well. And then last but not least, the most important thing is, all of this will change our mindset, and digital first will be the new normal. And this is what we need to advocate. This is what we need to work on internally, but also with external stakeholders and also authorities. And we see an uptake on this as well. We will hear about EU Federated, for example, one of the projects that is also looking outside the box, and that will be in a different webinar. And as I promised, I tried to keep it as short as possible for me, and that will be my final words. And I really would like you to engage, join the working groups, contribute, run pilots, One Record pilots. There are also interesting IoT related pilots coming up. Join the hackathons, because it's massive. If you see what you can do in just 48 hours, then you will really be surprised and wonder why you might have not come up with something similar in the past 10 or 20 years. So please join, and let's work on this together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. So as mentioned, Matthias, he touched on the importance of data sharing. He touched as well on the benefits of data sharing. And our next speaker, Ashok Rajan, who is SVP and Head Cargo and Logistics Solutions with IBS Software, will look at the value of the data and the usage of this data through his presentation, Fueling Next Gen Air Freight with Data. Ashok, over to you.
Thank you, David. Let me just see if I can share my screen. David, is my screen visible?
Yes, now it's visible.
All right, okay, thank you. And David, as you rightly said, I hope to reinforce a lot of what Matthias said about data. And I was just remembering that 12 months ago, I was on this very same webinar, hoping that in 12 months' time we would do this face-to-face. Unfortunately, we still have to be digital on the digital webinars, but hopefully next time we certainly can do this overlooking the beautiful offices of IATA in Geneva. The one thing that has through all of this doom and gloom that's been there in the last 15 odd months, the bright spot for us has been cargo, and more so digital. At least when it comes to webinars. So me and Henk were on a very similar webinar yesterday. So the fact that there is so much of mind space and talk about this certainly augurs well for us as an industry. And what I want to sort of talk about is the oil, or is the fuel that runs this digital engine that is there, data, and just really look at it and say, what is this all of this noise about data? Is it worth going down? How do I see where I am, and what can it really deliver? I think that's sort of what I want to sort of talk about over the next 15 odd minutes. The first question I was trying to ask, does it really matter? Meaning, this, as I said, there's a lot of noise about data. Does it really matter? For this, I take you 7 years back, not too long back in time, 7 years back, and talk to you about two incidents. One was the country of Myanmar. Myanmar in 2014 decided to do their census, and they'd not done something like that for close to 3 to 4 decades. And there's also a story around how they ran out of pencils for collecting data on paper, and how they had to sort of get people to sharpen pencils and things like that for another day. But they did run the census, a lot of this on paper, collected all of the data together. And of all of the information that came out through a census, one thing a bit shocked people who were running the census. Myanmar for years together had assumed its population was 60 million. The census turned out that the population was actually only 51 million. Now you'd say, what's to do with a few million here or there? But then for decades, the government of Myanmar had been planning its budgets around the fact that there are 60 million people, running its social schemes around the fact that there are 60 million people. And this is, so all of what Myanmar was doing was also for 20% of the population that simply did not exist. And in that same year, Germany, on its route to the famous 2014 World Cup win, used data, big data, and analytics as part of its core strategy going into winning that World Cup there. And what I wanted to sort of bring out here is that to this question, does data matter? Meaning, it does matter. The fact that you don't have data or don't know data also matters. And what it matters can be for something as large as what you do for a society, and as something that you would not associate with technology or data, really sport. I mean, this is what data can do for you, and that's why data is relevant. Now, the point here is that if it was so relevant, why is it that we're starting to hear about this more so recently? Meaning, you can look at recently as 10 years, 5 years, 2 years, but why is there this big shift that is happening, and why is suddenly data coming to the fore? To do that, if I were to go to the next slide here, this is not my screen burnt, but then I hope a lot of you would have seen this picture in televisions or newspapers a couple of years ago. For those who don't, for those who probably haven't seen it, this was the first ever picture of a black hole that was taken. And for years, this was assumed to be an impossible mission, because the assumption was that if you had to really take the picture of a black hole, you would need a radio telescope the size, the diameter of Earth. Now, how did this finally get taken? We didn't really build something as big as that. What they used was something very different. They were known as what was known as square kilometer arrays, meaning a square kilometer of radio telescopes, 8 of them in different parts of the world, kept completely in sync and processing information, and information that was generated at 5 petabytes of data. And for those who are trying to get their head around what 5 petabytes of data means, it's data that would fit into 1,000 pounds of hard drives. So all of this data was taken, processed, and then was created this picture of the black hole. So what was seen as impossible earlier was done on the back of technology and data. And this is why, there are 3 factors that actually make data people talk about data as the new oil. Well, to me, data is the crude oil. I don't know how many of you can make use of crude oil as it stands. Really, the value comes if you were to refine it and convert it into stuff that you use and run your vehicles on. So really, when it comes to why is data so relevant today, and why is it that suddenly it can make the impossible possible? I'll come down to 3 things. First is we can now store data, and as innocuous as it might sound, many decades ago you could store 5 megabytes of data in something that would be the size of 2 refrigerators. You would have seen this movement in your lifetimes, from going from floppy disks to CD-ROMs to DVDs to USBs. You can store a terabyte of data on the edge of your pen. That's also still now going out. Virtually, with the cloud coming on board, you now get to literally infinite capacity when it comes to storing data. You just look at the number of videos that go up onto YouTube. That itself probably gives you a sense that storage is no longer the constraint. You can store literally infinite amount of data. That's one. Number 2, what has happened is that we can now exchange data. When you could, from a time when you could not so long ago really, when you could really do analog voice, human to human, or if many of you remember the dial-up lines that we used to have, to broadband, to 3G, 4G, 5G, and gigabits of second. Now you can really move data at a pace which allows people to do remote surgery. The point is that we now, like I was saying, how do you keep those 8 radio telescopes in sync? Because now you can exchange data almost instantaneously, and pretty much infinite amount of data instantaneously. Now that adds the second dimension to why data starts to work. The third, most importantly, is we can now process data at an amazing pace. From decades ago, when it was considered a big victory to be carrying out 2 logical transactions on what was then a computer, to having the power of a computer on most, or power of supercomputers in the past on your mobile phones. The space at which computing power is going up. Really, we're looking at singularity where processing power will sort of exceed the capability of the human mind, not in a not too far distance. So I think all of this therefore makes us being able to store, exchange, and process data at very, very high quantities suddenly makes the crude oil, petrol, or diesel. Now, this is the change that has happened over the recent past that's made data very, very relevant. Now we are obviously in aerospace, but in an aerospace business, but not necessarily in astrophysics. So why we are not in the business of taking pictures of black holes. At best, we take pictures of damaged shipments. So from if you were to really come down to industries like ourselves, enterprises, what's been the evolution of data? And this is how sort of I would like to look at it and saying how is data evolved over a period of time. In reality, I look at it in 3 buckets. One is pure, this is also for us to see where do we stand in. One is pure data processing, where basically you know data. You know data that used to sit on paper now sits and is retrievable. You can use it for audit. You can run procedures on it. Data as data processing. The second level of the second sort of evolution has been from using that to data harnessing. You work the data. You basically create dashboards, create information, create support systems. So that's something you would call data harnessing. But then the other stage is to get to being data driven, as Matthias was talking about, where one was where you work, one is you know the data, you work the data, and when you get to data driven, you get data to work you. That's pretty much the stage that you would look at the evolution of how data is moved. And to that, I think a lot of industries are trying to make this transition from data harnessing to being data driven. But I think if I were to put my view on where we as an industry stand, I think our position probably sits somewhere in a maturity of data harnessing. While I think it gives a view that we probably not where we should be, it gives us a lot of headroom to say why we should invest into doing this, and what's the art of the possible if you were to make that journey forward. And looking at this from we looked at this from saying across industries, what's the view. Now the point then is, if you look within, how do you now, this is where you stand. So what is it that you can do in terms of saying, how do you move us forward in terms of proper data usage? And for me, it comes down to two things, and two things where we need as an industry, as enterprises, as organizations, sort of need to measure ourselves. One is, how mature is your data in what you have? We as an organization also work with a lot of companies trying to make sure data can work for them. And one of the things we do is to say, how mature is the data in the enterprise? And sort of I look at it from saying, there's a primary level, there's an active level, or advanced level. What do I mean by that? You can look at yourself. One is you can just have data with you. Basically, you have data. If you were to get to a primary level of data, which means that you get all of your basic data in Everbell's right, all of your flight milestones are right, you are on a good level of usage with regard to eAvailables, all of this is right. So once you can get clean data of what you fundamentally do, itself raises the maturity level of your data by at least 50%. Where you can really start to, when I say maturity, you get data which you can work with, is the point. So you can get to at least a higher than 50% maturity when it comes to, if you can get your basics right. Now, the second stage, as I would look at it, is saying is active. When I say active, the first stage is you look in-house, you look at your data, you look at is it clean? Is it in proper electronic format? All of this. The second is, if you were to look beyond the walls of your organization, say, can you get to enhanced data sharing? Basically, you've got data elements that you can exchange with other stakeholders in our supply chain. Can you get data which is relevant to a shipment, relevant to decisions you make, but from outside the walls of your organization, where you can get to a level of data sharing, and also you have a view on processes. We talked about flight milestones, which are probably large and coarse in nature. If you were to look within your own operations and say, do I have workflows which tell me that how much of shipment has moved, who is working where? So this is a level of information where you're saying, these are things I do, but these are things I know I do. How much workflows is probably the right example, is the most apt example as well, where you're looking at saying, my movement of shipments of cargo within a warehouse has done all of this, which means that how many of my people are occupied, not occupied, how much of what of my processes are not sitting right. So if you're able to get to a view from within your operations through digitization of your processes and a look outside your organizations, it gives you a multiplier effect in terms of the maturity of your data. We would say move it up by 2 to 5x in terms of maturity if you're able to get that level of data into into your ecosystem. The next level is where you can go, where you're looking at things probably which are not processes that exist today. One is, for example, get into a far more granular level of information. If you were to have IoT or RFIDs on shipments, and it gives you information of exact movements, temperatures, or you have specialized process on specialized cargo, it gives you regular temperature updates. It gives you all of these things. This is a different gamut of information that is there, where what you can do with it the maturity goes through the roof. It can go to 10 to 20x in terms of maturity of the data. So it's good to always look at this and measure where do we stand, and it gives and it will help us move the needle forward. The other point, as I was saying, is how much do you make your data sweat? There is all of this data. What do you do with it? What do you, if you look at it, I look at it and say there's a level 1 view of it. If you are at level 1, if you use your data to produce the right reports, you get an information of what's happened. My flight, there's flown as booked data. There is all of these things which are saying, giving you a description of what's happened, or control tower kind of things where you get a set of information to help you sort of say, okay, my flights coming in are late, so therefore this is what I should do. So this is where you would be at a level 1 activity, where with what do you do with your data. You can move it up a level 2 if all of this action is proactive and not reactive. In a sense that there is pure data-driven decision making that will happen. Whether it is to say, like I was mentioning earlier, saying that based on how do you plan the shifts that are there. Do I know that there are a certain set of docks are underperforming and therefore we need to do something there, or to say that what is your staffing pattern has to be more in the morning and less in the afternoon. These kind of data-driven decision making. And when I say democratize data consumption, today very often data and dashboards are seen as very senior management-ish, meaning you look at it to say, what's my total revenue, what are my markets and things like that. When I say democratize data, can you bring this down? Do you have data which makes, like for example, a supervisor to be able to make his day-to-day decisions based on very informed data that's flowing through? If you're able to get there, then you say you're on a level 2 kind of data sweating level. The third level is, of course, where we want to get to, where you can go really, where you go really crazy. Basically, it says that you you turn it on and let it work for itself. Whether it is prescriptive analytics, like every morning the system comes out and tells you, okay, this is how your capacity is to be fragmented, or this is how or say, look at something like dynamic pricing and say, this is what your price should look like from between 3 and 5. And just saying, if you're able to get to that, or self-correcting process, you know that without somebody having to look at it and make a change, there's a set of shipments which probably will not meet your promised SLAs, and therefore automatically it gets you onto the right corrective action to get to. So what I'm saying is there's a need for us to see where we stand and what's our headroom, and really both of these sort of work in tandem. And I almost want the right side to push the left, because like you're saying, if you're in India, people wear seat belts in a car because you could be fined by the police, not really that because it's safe. Now that's a bit of how data works. You're simply the reason why data doesn't move sometimes at the pace we want is because there's a compliance mindset to it, saying that I'm looking to get to compliance with the EA level, not that my processes will move up a level to get to EL. Like for instance, I'm saying if you are at that level 3 of transaction processing, where you're saying, I can now get completely automated load plans which will flow through. And if that was then to drive saying there is value that is coming through that, and therefore can we get better and better data. So this is this needs to be a self-sustaining ecosystem where you show value, and therefore there's pressure on getting the right data. And the more better data you get, the greater value you can create. And if you're able to get this cycle going, then I think we are on a roll towards being a completely data-driven ecosystem. And what can you really do with all of this? And something that we as an organization have also been working significantly on. Something I presented last time as well, saying this is how we look at as our template for a digital air freight enterprise, on how products are created, on how we should be digitally engaged with regulators and all of this. What I want to sort of put in here is the 3D digital 3D air freight enterprise, which is the data-driven digital air freight enterprise. Now, what can this be? Now, this is something, for instance, we've been working a lot on, saying there are digital transactions that we do for making sure air cargo processes are done. We've now have large teams which are actually working on building data boosters to this, or putting these processes on steroids. For example, the data boosters to your capacity planning, which suddenly makes movement from capturing your allotments to actually creating them themselves. So we are also now working on saying, helping to move air freight enterprises that way, building on data boosters which are built on high-end analytics and AI and ML technology as well. So what can this really mean for us? Air freight products can move to being hyper-personalized offerings. If you go to saying that give this person a certain product which allows him to move his cat with a certain set of services from end to end. Something as very, very narrow on that, where there is demonstrated value, and therefore you create more value. So if you're on a proper data-driven digital enterprise, you have the opportunity to really create hyper-personalized offerings, or drive AI ML in capacity planning or dynamic pricing, a subject which often gets talked about in soft terms. That's where you can get to where you're saying you can really move pricing like how the stock market moves, or really look at your operations and say, for air cargo, which spends a lot of time on the land, where is my slack and what can I optimize automatically? Or when it comes to SLAs, like I mentioned early correction and detection, that can happen. Or when you actually talk to things like regulatory bodies, can you drive regulation and compliance by exception? We work on this on other lines of business, other products as well. Our loyalty business is actively now building a fraud detection mechanism, a tool which actually looks at patterns and says there is something wrong with this. Can you actually drive a proper data-driven digital enterprise will be able to do regulation by exception and not by brute force, or how you engage your customers to really drive proper loyalty programs. And when you say plug into your customers, it's also a very seamless integration into the parent structure, which is the supply chain itself. So this is the world that we as an organization have seen as to where can you get with a proper data-driven digital air freight enterprise. And I hope that all of us can jointly sort of work in measuring where we stand, creating value, and therefore driving towards this sort of an enterprise view. I'll sort of wrap up there with that view. Just 10 seconds on people who may not know us as an organization. IBS Software is an organization which builds digital platforms primarily for the travel, transportation, logistics industry. Everything from crew planning, fleet planning, operations, MRO, to passenger systems, loyalty management systems, cargo, of course, to managing tour and cruise and hospitality with some of the world's best known brands in airlines, airports, cruise lines, hospitality that we work with, and very proud to be working with this industry as well. Well, and with that, I'll wrap up. David, back to you.
Thank you very much, Ashok. So with Matthias, who shared with us the importance of standards to be able to share data, to interconnect the different stakeholders to share data, and Ashok, who just presented the value of the data and how to best make use of this data. I would like to welcome now on this virtual stage Matthias Hurst from Agility, Klaas Kurtz from DB Schenker, who are going to co-moderate the panel discussion that we're going to have. And with them, we're going to have as well Judith Tipanat from Air France-KLM Cargo, Ashok Rajan from IBS Software, and Alessandro Rivolta from ALA Group, who are going to share with us their views on the importance of a standard for data sharing and the data sharing as a whole. For I believe that I will hand over now to Klaas, who will start to moderate these panel discussions. Over to you, Klaas.
Yeah, David, thanks for having me, and good afternoon and good morning, good evening to everybody here to our panel discussion with the topic defining and adopting industry standards. What opportunities do we have for air cargo? I'm really delighted that we have experts around here representing our air carriers, solution providers, ground handlers, and last not least, forwarders. I'm even more delighted to not only have experts in here, but we also have friends in here. So we are all working for a really long time together, and Matthias already mentioned our working groups, digital cargo working groups that we are all working in and try to supply our industry. Of course, it would be a great pleasure to have this meeting face to face here, and Ashok also mentioned that already, to have the nice Alps in the background. And yeah, again, this year it was not possible, but we are all looking forward to the next face to face meetings. I also saw in the pre-discussion here how much passion we all have in this topic, and so let's get started. And without further ado, Judith, I would quickly like to introduce you also. You're product manager paperless, product owner for eDoc at KLM Air France Cargo. You're also part, as I mentioned, of the digital cargo working group at IATA. And so welcome, and let's hit it.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Lovely for being here.
Thanks, Judith. So as a first question, also, can you explain to us the vision from KLM Air France Cargo on the standardization of data sharing?
Yes, of course. I think data sharing, as said before, is very important. As Air France KLM, of course, we endorse the usage of one record on the longer term, but we all know we're not there yet. I think our cargo industry has really a long way to go there. We see as a carrier that the majority of our customers still relies on, let's say, the end of life cargo imp. And I think that majority needs to move, ideally as quickly as possible, to a much more richer, let's say a richer data format if possible, because otherwise you can't even share the data. And I think as Ashok mentioned, then we are far away even from the average level. In parallel, we are really keen on implementing the standard error codes, because if you share data, you also want to know if something is not correct. So by moving over and sharing that standard data codes with our customers, I think we enable each other to improve also data quality, because data sharing cannot be done without a proper quality. And I would say last to that, if we have the opportunity in data sharing, we would of course like to do it omni-channel, because we need it at every point of our customer. And I think there's a huge way to learn in collaboration with the industry, but maybe even cross modality.
Thank you for these fruitful thoughts. And of course, as a forwarder, we are looking forward to the agreed error messaging, because it will help everyone here, and also including, of course, our ground handlers. So let's move over to the next panelist. We have Alessandro Rivolta. He's a project manager at ALHA Group at it's the airport in Milano and in Rome. Ale is also a long-term servant of various groups at IATA, which is going back to the mentioned cargo IM standards, and he was always representing his view and also the ground handlers' view out there. So welcome, mate, and thanks for joining.
Thanks, Klaas, and thanks to IATA for inviting me to talk on behalf of my GHA category.
Yes, and we are indeed very happy that you volunteered to do that. So, Alessandro, as the first question, I mean, how many specific implementations do you have to accommodate your customers for a similar need?
Okay, we have a lot of them, and we have, let's say, different issues that we can assume in two main areas, which are technical and on the business side. If I took the data from my system of last week, if I check the data from my system, I see that from the same message, we still receive and we are still asked to send a different version. And a lot of them are very, very, very old. I mean, for me as a GHA, one of the critical messages is the flight manifest. And I honestly discovered last week that we received the 25% of the messages we received of the flight manifest was version 4, which is 1994, 27 years old. And more than 10% of them are version 3. I was not aware that that was version 3, and I was not able to find the manual of a 80 years old manual. Means that on the technical side, if I need to implement, maintain my system, I need to maintain all this version, because I'm still, for example, required to send as a GHA status update using version 6, which again is 25 years old. This on the technical side, but we have another issue on the business side, because for the same message, we are required to use different fields, different formats, different interpretation, like you said. For the FWB, for example, my colleagues must use a dedicated manual, which I think is version 9.3 now, which is a 30 pages manual, because every single airline is, which are my customer, of course, are playing around the different options that Cargo IMP give them. And so in this way, we need to insert the data differently depending on the carrier I am transmitting the message. This is for the message. And on the other side, the last one is different specification implementation for the same need. I take the same example that Matthias used a few minutes ago. A couple of years ago, when you all know China customs was our top issues, we had only in my company in Milan, we had 8 different interpretation for the same need. How to send the information to China customs, using which field, how, in which way, timing, everything.
Indeed, that's interesting what you just shared. Ale, where do you see the specific chances for you as a GHA in terms of standardization to especially avoid the manual interactions that you mentioned with your 40-pager documentation on where to put which data?
It's not only for me. It's not only for GHA. I think, Klaas. It's a chance that we have as an industry now, because if I take a famous sentence, in every challenge there is an opportunity. I think a challenge bigger than this pandemic, it's difficult to find something so challenging for us. But on the same time, the world discovered how our industry is crucial for life. We have for the vaccine transportation now, and before for the PPE transportation, We have example of carriers that survived like for cargo. Now cargo is under the spot, is under the light finally. Finally, my friends and my mother understood what I'm doing at the airport, understood what is a GHA. So now is the time for us, for all our industry, to make one step forward. And if I have to take the sentence that was said a couple of days ago from Mr. Ige, we need one common standard and one common language in one common system. Means that our next step, our big chance for me and for all our industry is the adoption. The next step is the adoption of one record. Of course, the data sharing, as explained by Jacques before, and in the last session 2 days ago, is the data sharing is our next future. We can't stick anymore to messaging and with messages 25, 27, 28 years old. We need to make one step forward. And on the other side, I think that our digital cargo working group can do a lot in terms of standardization. And like you said before, and Matthias said, and everyone is saying, I can't wait to meet all my colleagues and friends again face to face.
Okay, Alessandro, I really feel with you and your issues. From a forwarder side, we experience similar things. So I really feel with you. But Klaas, let me take this opportunity to pick up on all the issues we heard that we already have internally within the air cargo community. You as representing a large forwarder, where do you actually see the possibilities and potentials of going multimodal if we already have all those issues in our own industry? How do you tackle this from a forwarder perspective, if you can share that?
And Matthias, I think this is an excellent point that you're making. First of all, I mean, the ocean freight industry is looking at us as an air freight industry as a role model, right? To be really clear on that. So what we do is I wouldn't call it better, but it's way advanced to what we do in ocean freight, right? And for me, multimodality is one of the key success factors to achieve standards in the whole cargo industry, right? As a forwarder, I mean, we need to make sure that all modes are included. One record as a data model is by definition already multimodal, and I think this is an important point that we need to make, right? And at IATA, we are also talking to all other modes. We are talking, for example, to the DCSA, which is the Digital Container Shipping Association. And if you just look at air and ocean data elements for our transport are very similar. And more importantly, for us as forwarders, I mean, we are talking about the same customer and clients, right? And they expect from us that we give the same service for all modes within the industry. And also the data that we receive from our clients are very similar between air and ocean. And here's, I think, a great chance that one record can help us as a forwarders, and also by that the whole industry. And again, I think it's not a surprise that the maritime stakeholders are very interested in the findings and results that we received or achieved during the one record journey already with our pilots that we are holding. But what I just quickly want to mention is, I hope it is a big surprise for the whole audience here that for the first time this year, the One Record Hackathon will include multimodal challenges. And it will also include stakeholders from the whole maritime industry, including carriers and also associations. And I can only recommend that you all watch next week the hackathon part of this webinar, where Arnaud and team will further elaborate on the hackathon. I'm looking forward to it, and I hope you all do. And again, please keep in mind, One Record is not an air freight model. It's made for the whole industry, and therefore it is multimodal. So let's push it and move forward with it.
Thank you, Klaus.
Ashok, just why don't you just join the discussion now? Can you share the role and the value of a solution provider in the data sharing landscape with the industry standards, such as we have now with One Record?
Thank you, Klaus. I think I can feel the pain that Alessandro was mentioning about keeping these variants in sync, and I think the IT providers also do deal with a very similar pain of saying, how do you keep, and the view I've had, although because I'm not a direct stakeholder, I can sort of be a little bit more aggressive in what I say, but in the sense that what I think is that there is the thing with different sort of versions and lack of standardization is that it's seen more as an inconvenience and not as lack of that you're losing out on something. The reason I say that is that if, like I was expressed in my presentation, if going on to version 9 had a big value difference and the stakeholder was missing out on something, he would be sort of motivated himself to sort of move up the versions. Today, in a sense, we try and do very similar things across these things, and therefore is an inconvenience. And therefore, I think one of the things is to push, is to be able to do something new with these things, and therefore say, if you don't do this, you are on economy class, not on business class. When I think that will be a big thing that we've seen engaging with number of customers as to what can be done. The other thing, again, I go back to how India has moved on. India used to have very little adoption of fixed line telephones. They moved, there was a big jump that happened from fixed line telephones to large penetration of mobile phone technology. I think that is probably what One Record gives us the opportunity to do. Rather than trying to fixing a number of things in current standards, is there a means for us to make a clean shift onto literally leapfrog and get somewhere else? So therefore, you can start afresh without carrying the legacy of. And that's where I think the industry can hold players, IT or service providers like us accountable to also make sure that the tools for you to make that jump are made available by people like us.
Thank you, Ashok. Judith, we now talked about opportunities from the solution providers. Which opportunities do you see with the use of data sharing for the entire shipment lifecycle? I mean, and with that, I mean from shipment preparation to booking and to operations.
Well, that's a lot. I see the opportunity, especially now, because before we were on paper. I think it has been said before. We have a lot of paper in our chain. I heard Matthias already saying we need to go to a mindset where it is digital first. I think we are now a little bit in the balance of paper versus digital. But ideally, I would like to make the same move as Ashok earlier made on different industries. Look at the retail industry. The retail industry doesn't have digital first. The retail industry has digital only. And I think that is the point on the horizon where we need to strive to. And how do we do that? Because I think the common need that we have is data sharing. And how can we do that? Well, if we have one standard, we can already share it from the beginning of the booking to, I would say every touch point that we have to inform our customer. And well, that can of course only be done if we are connected in a good way. So I think that the biggest challenge here to do so might be even necessary to enforce, because it's a mindset. We have been working 30 years on the same way, 30 years with paper. And well, I think everybody agrees that we want to be real. We want to know real time where our shipment is. But are we ready as an industry to look in the mirror and saying, hey, we really need to make that next move? So, well, data is the oil. I think it was Ashok saying that earlier. I really think data is the gold, but does our staff also see that as a gold? And do we get them along in making this real business change? I think the need is there, but do we all have the right power to enforce it?
Thanks, Judith, for that.
Thank you.
Matthias, do you have any final thoughts on the whole topic?
Well, I think the contribution from the people on the call and the people in the Digital Cargo Working Group, we really can see the engagement of all of the individuals and how passionate they are. And this is what is fueling the change. And I really would like to keep this going. And we also have it on a more executive level, as we heard in the executive session that Riege, for example, shared the Cargo XML to one record conversion kit, or will share that, which will also help all of us. We see that companies taking a lot of decisions and do a lot of investments to really propel the transition to a more digital environment. And I think with this, I would again ask everybody to contribute, and we will see this next week as well. We need to work and interact with other groups as well. We mentioned, for example, EU Federated, which looks super interesting for us as well. We can work with Cargo IQ, for example, to further drive quality, run pilots, join hackathons, but it requires us to be doers, as David mentioned. We really need to roll up our sleeves and get our hands on this and make it happen. And that's why we need everybody's contribution. That would be my wrap up. And thanks everybody for your passion and for your engagement. It's really, really important.
Thank you, Matthias.
So thanks, Matthias, for the great summary. And with that, I would like to hand over to David again.
Thank you, Klaas and Matthias, for the moderation. Thank you, Judith, Ashok, and Alessandro for your contributions. I have a few questions coming from the audience. I believe that the next one will be for you, Klaas. Klaas, you are working with Arnaud Lambert on the pilot project for One Record. Can you share with us the status of the pilot project? How far do the pilot project implemented the One Record, and what are the first outcome that you've seen during these pilot projects?
Okay, I mean, I think this is also one part of next week's session, so I just want to quickly highlight a few things, what happens there. First of all, we all need to understand, of course, I mean, the pilots are running pilots, right? So there will not be a 100% solution, and this is why we run pilots, right? So what we can share is that we have stakeholders from all over the supply chain in our pilots. We also now introduced solution providers, and I mean, one of the outcomes is I think Matthias mentioned it already, done by Riege, that we do a conversion from Cargo XML to One Record. And what we could see is yes, it is working. We again looked at various pilots already, and we are now enriching also the data model based on the inputs from the pilots. And for that one, we also now include more difficult topics like pharma. And what we also see is that that also a few airports around the world are catching up, and one of them is Heathrow, where they push it, and the other one is Frankfurt Airport. And what we need to understand here, and I think this is also something like lessons learned from EU Airwaybill as well as Cargo XML, we need to have the local heroes that are pushing the topics. And for that one, I think we have a good variety, right? We have Lufthansa. For example, we also have Alessandro as the king of the hill in Italy. So that's all good that we have those people, and that's the way how to push it.
Thank you, Klaas. And actually, this is very related to the next question that we have in industry that is used to and maybe even comforted by incrementalism. What change management strategies do you suggest for moving organizations into data and data sharing maturity? So for me, the first thing that we need to look at is what we have done or may not have done with Airwaybill, where with Airwaybill, what we wanted to do is to digitize the paper Airwaybill into an electronic format. But we haven't looked that much into the benefits and the value of having data for Airwaybill instead of the paper Airwaybill, where what we are looking at with One Record is to look at the value of data, the opportunity of value-added services coming from the use of data, the potential business transformation that we can get with the data, and really looking at all these business benefits, and not only a technical mean of digitizing paper documents into something electronic. And I believe that this is the main change that will incentive and drive the adoption of the One Record standard, because people, they will understand and they will see the benefit in a tangible way of the use of data as presented by Ashok in his presentations. I don't know if you have any other comment on these questions.
What I would like to add to this is that all of the stakeholders need to ask themselves if they just want to limit themselves to covering the current process, meaning everything that is related to Airwaybills and the respective data, or if they really want to think ahead and really want to come up with end-to-end digital solutions that they can offer either to their customers or to potentially regulatory authorities or to their users to make it more attractive to work with internal systems and things like this. And I personally believe that the whole sustainability topic will benefit a lot from the One Record data model, because we will be able to do things that we currently cannot imagine because we're still so stuck in our messaging environment, and we cannot even imagine the solutions that are ahead of us. And this is why I really think that people need to ask themselves if it's not too late already to get into the game, because if you stay beside the sideline, stay at the sideline, you're not going to win the championship, right? You need to be on the pitch and you need to play, and that's what we need to see, because otherwise we don't get there.
Thank you, Matthias. Then we have another question, which is very related to your comment, Matthias, is what are the existing services available relying on One Record and data sharing? So today, the ambition that we have with the One Record, and particularly through the One Record data model, is to be able to cover all the data exchange required between the different stakeholders of the industry. And also what we want to achieve is to enable use cases that are not available or feasible with the standard messaging standard that we have today, the legacy standard that we have. One of the examples that I have in mind is, for instance, we are working on a project called Interactive Cargo, which objective is to enable the use of IoT devices and to enable the data sharing coming from these IoT devices. And we saw here a very good application of OneRecord, where all the different stakeholders, they could implement once the API standard that is common to different stakeholders, and with the use of the implementation of the data model, being able to have access of these data elements almost real time as soon as the device makes this data available to the different party authorized to have access to this data. So my point is that not only we want to cover the existing base with OneRecord, but as you mentioned, Matthias, we want to explore and imagine what is not ready today, but will be likely value-added services that will bring value to the industry. I have another question. Maybe that one is for you, Ashok. What are the main obstacles in implementing OneRecord?
I think, unlike what people say, I think the challenge is not so much to do with the standard or what you can do with it. The challenge really in terms of coming out the right use cases to actually implement it. Because implementing a OneRecord standard is as good as implementing any other standard in place. So that's the point. I think I also wanted to add on to what you mentioned, David, is that the real drive will come if you were to actually do something very cool with OneRecord, because a lot of time hype drives adoption. It's a bit like it's a bit like how iPhones are aspirational. I think we need to sort of work together to do something that's cool, and I think that something that can catch headlines, and that itself will drive adoption, because otherwise OneRecord standard implementation from an IT platform is like any other standard implementation. I think it's about how you to roll this out. There has to be desire on taking OneRecord on, and I think to create that desire is where I think we should probably come together to do something that will say, wow, that sounds cool. I think if we do get there, then you will find traction on its own. And if you do find traction, then I think IT system backbone implementation standards will sort of find momentum of its own, is what my view is.
So I totally agree to having the requirement to make things sexy, and I believe that we will see a lot in the coming hackathon. We already have seen very good and interesting things in the last ones, and now just imagine there is more. As Lars mentioned, there is more interactive cargo related topics. There are more topics covered. Those will cover solutions for pharma industry, which is in the pandemic a big thing, right? And I believe that there will be some really smart people coming up with really cool solutions, and then everybody thinks, oh wow, and then they will change, and then people. We can hope that it's not too late, right? But I agree, yeah, we need to have attractive solutions, and OneRecord certainly will enable those.
So if I can summarize, basically the key takeaway is make us dream and build everything that we couldn't imagine until today.
Correct.
Well, on this words, thank you very much again, Klaas, Ashok, Matthias, Alessandro, and Judith. I think it was a very insightful sessions on the digitalizations, the data sharing, and most importantly, why we do that and the value that is behind. And before I close the sessions, maybe I just wanted to ask you last questions. Ashok, you mentioned it. You touched on it during your presentation about level of maturity in terms of data usage. My question would be more general. Is to your knowledge, what is the maturity, the digital maturity of the air cargo industry? Well, that's a tricky question, right?
If we compare it to other industries, it's pretty poor. But then it's also compared to, again, other industries, it's more standardized. There is more collaboration, but we're no way close to where we could be if we were to do away with all the legacy issues we still have, because we cling to, as Alessandro said, 26 years old versions of let's say, Cargo Imp. Right? It's a whole generation already in between, and yeah, the world keeps turning, and it keeps turning for us as well.
So actually, to try to answer in a more accurate way to that questions, IATA will launch its first industry survey on the digital maturity. It will be launched on July the 1st. Please check the IATA website. It will be published there. We'll also organize an emailing campaign where you will receive that survey that will help us to have a better understanding of where this industry is standing in terms of maturity. We know that there are lots of stuff that is still running on the paper-based processes. We know that with EAWeBIL, what we wanted to do is to first make a first step in digitizing the paper document into an electronic format. But we know that we developed a whole set of messages that enables to digitize other type of document. And since a couple of years, we've been working on one record to define standard data model APIs to be able to not only digitize, but really embrace the digitalizations. And the end game would be to reach that state where a company can really transform themselves, fully embrace digitalizations, and to use the data to define new digital processes, create new value-added services, or even take this opportunity to transform their business model. So this first industry survey will help us to have a better understanding on where we stand, what are the different priorities, and where we should put a focus on in order to best accompany the industry towards these transformations. So the survey will be open during the summer. As I mentioned, it will be launched on July the 1st. And we'll have the result that will be unveiled during the 14th World Cargo Symposium that will be held in Istanbul. And it will be particularly done during the digital cargo track on Thursday, the 14th of October. So be there, and you will have the result of this first industry survey.
Then David, let me allow me to then recommend this survey to all the participants that are listened currently, because what we learned today is that it all starts with data. So if you're now invited to share that data with us, we can draw the right conclusions together. And I think that's the first step that we need in our industry. We really need to cooperate together in order to take that next step. I think we're all willing to get there. So let's go.
Thank you, Judith. Just a reminder on the next webinar that will be held on the 29th of June, 14 CET. It will be hosted by my colleague Sonia Benhamida, and she will present the Interactive Cargo project. She will share the status of the development of the standards, and also share the status of the different pilot projects that are going on. And she prepared as well a little surprise for you. I'm not going to reveal everything now. So let's come back next week for the interactive cargo sessions. And with that, thank you very much, everyone. We just arrived at the end of the sessions, and I hope you enjoyed it. And bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.